Welcome to Small Arms Solutions. Today we have a video that was requested by one of the viewers. You guys leave a lot of comments on the channel for the various videos, and believe it or not, I do read most of them. I do try to respond to some of them. One of the questions was regarding the history of the Colt government carbine, the AR-15A2 government carbine, which is R6520. Well, I just happen to have an R6520 in my personal collection, and I have a few of the other rifles that evolved to that. So what we're going to talk about the AR-15A2 government carbine and its iterations, but I think we're going to talk a little bit about the generations that came before it. What you see here is the quintessential AR-15A2 government carbine AR-6520. This one's slightly evolved from the original one due to the fact that this one has the magazine fence. This one does not have the original AR-15 Sporter type upper and lower receiver, which we're going to get into in a minute. But this is the rifle we're going to be centering on, but we're going to talk first about how we got here. In 1977, Colt introduced their first SP1 carbine, which is what we see here, the R6001. And this one was in place from, say, 1977 until really early 80s when they came out with the first A2 Sporter 2. What we had here is basically the same AR-15 SP1 upper and lower receiver that we had on the standard rifle. The biggest change was the barrel. We now have a 16-inch chrome olive vanadium 1 and 12-inch Swiss barrel. These can be written a couple different ways. CMPB, you can see a CMP chrome bore on there as well, but these are all 1 and 12-inch. Standard front sight base. The single heat shield XM177 series handguards, very robust. These are not like what you'd see more recently in the reproductions. You had a two-position receiver extension, and you had basically this is a type of an aluminum type of a stock. Two positions, your standard pistol grip. The biggest change between the R6000 and the R6001 had to do with the trigger mechanism. Due to the fact that the cyclic rate was a lot higher due to the shorter gas system, there was an issue with the disconnector on the original SP1. The original SP1, it was modified, as you'll see from the photographs. You did not have a tail on the back, and it moved the disconnector spring forward. The problem was when it moved the disconnector spring forward, it gave you less leverage. So the higher cyclic rate caused by the carbine gas system would cause you to have doubles, and occasionally you'd have non-conforming bursts with it. So they switched back on the carbine to the standard M16 style disconnector, which had the tail. They cut the tail off, but they moved the trigger spring back to its normal location, and that eliminated that problem. Now, this rifle here is how it was produced. There was never at any time an SP1 carbine that had a forward assist. Now, we have seen, throughout Gunbroker and other places where people have taken the A2 Sporter 2 upper receiver, which had the forward assist, placed this barrel on it, and threw it on here, and basically did an M16A1 carbine. Now, Colt has had some very, very interesting runs of custom things that they had done over the years, so you can never say never. But for as far as Colt's catalog, the R6001 always came in this configuration, and it will remain this way up until 1985. In 1985 was also the adoption of the M16A2 and the new 5.56 NATO 62 grain projectile. So Colt had gone on to build the A2s, and they started now doing sort of an evolution with the new NATO cartridge to update the new barrels to the 1 and 7. So in 1985, they created what was called the AR-15A2 Sporter 2 carbine. There were 3 different iterations of these, and 2 of them I can't find part numbers to differentiate, but there was one basic change. So what we have here is a 3rd generation version of the AR-15A2 Sporter 2 carbine, referred to as the R6420. Now, the original AR-15A2 carbine basically was the exact same rifle that you saw before, with a 1 and 7-inch Swiss barrel, and they had switched over to a polymer stock. No forward assist, no cartridge case deflector. That was their first model that came out in 1985. And then as those receivers started to go out, they started integrating the forward assist. So you would have an AR-15A2 Sporter 2 carbine, which would have this configuration here, minus the cartridge case deflector. And they would do those as well on the full-length rifles. Then we finally come to the 6420 here. This was the final model that Colt would put out that had the A1 style carrying handle. And what we have here is the addition of the forward assist as well as the fire cartridge case deflector. Final version. So the entire AR-15A2 Sporter 2, the biggest difference was solely the fact that you had forward assist and then added the fire cartridge case deflector. So other changes that were made, again, 1 and 7-inch Swiss barrel on the A2 Sporter 2 series. You had the compensator instead of the flash suppressor of the A1. Again, this was one of the earlier ones, so it'll say CMP, bank particle proof tested, 5.56 NATO 1/7, and you also see you have a peel washer on here. And again, the stock. This was the other major difference, was in the stock. You have a polymer stock. It's still a 2-position receiver extension, and you also have the spanner wrench on here too. This is pre-castle nut that you would have on the LE6920, or which came out with the M4. So again, 3 versions of this. Now comes the introduction of the A2 government carbine. In 1988, this came out in Colt's catalog as the first carbine that was ever to use the new A2 government profiles rear sight, fully adjustable rear sight. Now, this was introduced at the same point with another rifle, the AR-15A2 government rifle, which is basically a commercial version of the M16A2. Now, when this first came out as the R6520, that was what we referred to as the green label. This is not a green label, this is a blue label. The green label would have had the exact same type of receiver you see here, which again has the slab side, no forward assist. It was the exact same original AR-15 forgings that was used on the Sporter series from day one. So the original green label would have that. It would have the large screw and collet in the front here. It would have a no notch cut in the bottom to clear an auto sear. So the major changes that would come through you would have the same barrel of the AR-15A2 Sporter. It's the exact same barrel. You'd have a more improved, stronger nylon type upper and lower handguard. Of course, you already had your Delta ring on your A2 series as well. Fully adjustable rear sights. Same stock. This particular rifle, what's most interesting about it was, up until the LE6920, this was the longest serving rifle in Colt's catalog. Yeah, the RE6520 ran 23 years until 2011. So let's delve in a little bit more about the history of the AR-15A2 government rifle. Okay, so we have the original R6520 green label, as we just described, with the standard lower receiver, the standard slab side, had the large front pivot pin. Again, 16-inch barrel, 1/7-inch twist, chrome plated. And this also, because of the introduction of the 5.56 NATO, they switched from the standard buffer to the H buffer, which gave it the additional weight to allow that cartridge case to rise up further before it would present it into the chamber. This also was not yet when we had the extended feed ramps. The original R6520 had the standard standard .155 diameter hammer and trigger pins. It was basically the same commercial rifle. Well, now we're going to start going into the next version. 1991 assault weapon ban comes into place. So what ended up happening was this wound up on the restricted list. However, there was, right before the assault weapon ban, when Colt basically was sold from Colt's Industries to Colt's Manufacturing, it was reintroduced as the AR-6520. The AR-6520 is where we started seeing some of the changeovers. Now, the most important changeover that came over was the changing to this lower receiver. Again, now we have the standard M16A2 lower receiver forging that's used, so we have it more true to what we currently have. Now, the first versions had the front pivot pin. The original ones were drilled out for the large screw and collet, and that lasted not too long. It was a waste of Colt's money doing that when they could just use their standard small pin, which they did. Now, the initial small pin, it wasn't a push pin with a detent. Basically, you stuck the pin in, and on the left-hand side, you had a screw that screwed into place, and it was held in place by a screw. Some people got lucky that when they drilled these lower receivers, they drilled the pilot hole for the front pivot pin spring and detent. So all you had to do was pop that out, put your detent and your spring in, pop your front pivot pin in, and now you had a push pin. At some point in time, I can't exactly say when that was, is when you had the total removal of that, and they went to a standard push pin, and it was in this time period. Also, the guns were initially marked with nothing. The original ones that were prior to 1994, which this one here, this was right prior to the 1994 assault weapon ban, so probably within a couple of 3 months or so. This was very recent. When the 1994 assault weapon ban kicked in place, now all of a sudden these were read restricted law enforcement and government use only. And it would remain that way pretty much until its demise in 2011. It was part of their law enforcement line. So now we have the 1994 assault weapon ban. We have just the changes from the AR-6520. It's more unpleasantness. Colt voluntarily did the 170 diameter hammer and trigger pin, which made it so you could not put existing M16 or earlier or any other mil-spec components in there. So you had to have a special hammer, trigger, and disconnector. Then the other thing that they did was they installed the auto sear block. Basically, it was a machined piece that went into the receiver above the selector. So if you were to remove that, there's no way for you to place a auto sear or even a registered auto sear, or you could never convert these guns over to fully automatic. These receivers were basically impossible to convert. So they had done that. You had modifications to the bolt carrier where they removed the whole bottom area of the sear trip area. And then, again, 1994, it's restricted law enforcement government use only. Now Colt has 3 different tiers. They have their military sales, their law enforcement sales, and their commercial sales. Commercial sales, anything that had telescopic stocks, bayonet lugs, fly suppressors, was all done. The LE line, they remained in the LE line. Now the difference with Colt's different lines is LE guns went to LE distributors, whole separate entity from the commercial line. So they would all go over to there. So we'll go through the entire assault weapon ban. We had them as this configuration. The only thing that really changed during the assault weapon ban towards the end was they got rid of this nice gray finish and went to the jet black. They would eventually get rid of these handguards and go to the M4 handguards, the larger M4 handguards. There was no point in them manufacturing old, outdated handguards, so they could use better ones. And they switched over in 2009 to M16 bolt carriers. And in 2009, they got rid of that 170 diameter hammer trigger pin. They went back to the mil spec. So around 2009, the law enforcement versions of this all came back into the configuration pretty much you see here, but it had the proper hammer trigger pins and it had the black finish. So after the assault weapon ban, every one of these would go under the LE line. So now we're going to move forward to 2004, the sunset of the assault weapon ban. These were still produced, and they were in the hands of civilians. Never on Colt's catalogs or through Colt's commercial distribution. All the guns went through Colt's law enforcement distributors, and Colt's law enforcement distributors were free to sell them to whoever they wanted. So that's why that you will see all the later ones marked law enforcement government use only, which were restricted during the ban, which are no longer restricted, and they can be owned by anybody. And of course, they got their own serial number prefix, which was LGC. So let's talk a little about what happened during the ban also. Well, the first version came right before the assault weapon ban. It was the Colt Sporter series. So you had the Colt Sporter Lightweight, which basically was the same rifle that you had here, but what they did was they chopped off the bayonet lug and they put a standard rifle stock on here. And of course, they still had the auto sear block and they had the modified hammer trigger mechanism. And that was referred to as the R-6530. So now we hit the ban. We have now the Match Target Lightweight. The Match Target Lightweight went through a couple iterations. It would remain in Colt's commercial catalog until they finally got rid of that line altogether. So the Match Target had some differences. First, complete removal of the muzzle device. There was no threads on there, according to what the ban was. There was no bayonet lug. The Match Target, which went into production in 1994, would go through the same changes as we spoke about with the law enforcement guns. It would start off with the large hammer and trigger pins. It would start off with the auto sear, and then as time would go on, it would get rid of those things. And in 2009, of course, everything switched over to the M16 carrier. But those guns, probably of all the Colt lineup right now, are the least desirable unless you live in a banned state where they have the objectionable criteria that it would meet. The Colt Sporter series, it was very common for those after the sunset of the assault weapon ban. People would put their telescopic stocks right back on them, and then the guns were what they needed to be, with the exception of the bayonet lug. So this gun here had always been, really one of the favorites over all those years, and it would be the last rifle that Colt would ever have that would use the fully adjustable rear sights. This gun actually had a good market in law enforcement. Because of the fact that in law enforcement, many agencies who would buy patrol carbines, they did not want to worry about batteries and optics and everything. They wanted to go with a straight rifle. They wanted a straight lightweight rifle, which you got basically a 5.8 pound rifle. If you consider what M4s weigh these days with all the gadgets and everything on, you can get an M4 up over 10 pounds with all those gadgets. You have an 8.4 pound lightweight carbine. You have on the later versions, you had the 4-position stock. You had the improved castle nut on the later ones, right before the 2010, 2011 time period. You had the larger handguards, so it probably had a bigger law enforcement market than even commercial. You started seeing more of a retro thing we're on right now. Where people want retro guns, but this gun here again, it remained for 23 years. So I think it was very, very significant. And really what finally took this rifle down What finally took the rifle out of production was Colt's LE6920. LE6920 was 1998. It came into production, so you had that gap between 1998 and 2011 where you had both of these rifles that were made. This rifle here pretty much took over the complete market. There was really no reason to go with the lightweight over this. You had slightly more weight, but you had the ability to put your optics on there if you so chose. And this became Colt's flagship, and it still is to this day. This is pretty much the standard that most M4s have been compared to throughout the industry since it became available in 1998, and also since 1994 assault weapon ban ended in 2004. This was the gun that everybody wanted to get. So if you look at throughout the history of the Colt Sporter series, Colts were very unique rifles because they were the only ones who had all these different kinds of changes. If you went to any other manufacturer, they all started with this, the standard A2 receivers, the 155 diameter. There was no evolution of any of that. When you look at the Colt rifles, there's been an evolution, over the last 60 years of everything that they did. Even the same part numbers would go through changes. Again, if you look at all the changes that the AR-15A2 government model had went through, with the exception of the hammer and trigger pins, hammer trigger disconnector, with the inclusion of the auto sear block, those parts were always backwards compatible with the exception of those. So you could basically keep it as a revision instead of having to have a new part number. You didn't have new part numbers until you started coming out with the Sporter series, and then of course the match target. But Colt has remained with that for a really long period of time. Even today, there's a new iteration of it, the AR-15A2 carbine. Basically, what you have now is you have the same pencil barrel with the flat top upper receiver. So even today, you're still seeing a remnants of this rifle. The only difference is you got a flat top upper receiver. You're still getting it that lightweight. There are still people out there who want that light profile barrel. So there's still some lineage of it going on today. But again, I thought that was an interesting question that was asked by that viewer, and I thought this probably would make a really good video talking about one of the Colt's most iconic versions of the AR-15A2 series rifle. And this rifle here does remain in the hands of collectors in all of its iterations. When I got this one for my collection, I wanted the AR-6520. I wanted the one that had the proper A2 lower receiver, because I prefer that. This one does have the auto sear block in it, and it does have the 170 diameter hammer and trigger pins. What was cool about this rifle was this came out right before the assault weapon ban. So I would date this 1993, 92, because it had all the updates of the Sporter series with the A2 lower receiver, but it didn't have the law enforcement restricted marks on it, and it still had the proper Colt gray color. So this was sort of the ideal one that I wanted. I personally didn't really care about the enlarged hammer and trigger pins because I wasn't planning on changing out the trigger. That was a contention that Colt had with all of their guns. A lot of people who wanted to put in matched triggers. Very few companies made ones that would drop into the Colt receivers with these large hammer trigger pins. That really hurt Colt in that particular market. But overall, very big piece of the history of the Colt AR-15 series rifles, the Sporter series that went out for commercial sales. And I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, please like, please subscribe, and even share. Thank you.